All right, how are you guys doing today? Hopefully well. We're going to read chapter 39 in the book Alabama Moon by Watt Key. One of my all-time favorites. I have a list of book all-stars, or like an all-star favorite book list, because I have a hard time choosing a favorite because there's just so many good books out there. And I have a list of all these books that equally are great for different reasons. And one of the reasons why I love this is because I feel like the forest comes to life when Moon is running through the forest. The way Watt Key describes all these like little intricate details. I love the characters in this story. I love how I love how as a reader my opinion of certain character changes throughout the story, specifically with Hal. I've grown to really enjoy and love Hal, and I like what he's doing to try to help Moon. And I think it's a cool development of characters in the story, and that's not always an easy thing for a good writer to do. So a lot of reasons why I like this book. I hope you guys are enjoying it too. Yesterday when we left off, at the end of chapter 38, Sanders ends up showing up at the hospital, and he grabs Moon around the neck, puts him in a headlock. He hog ties him. That means he's handcuffed at the wrists, and he's also handcuffed at the feet, and so they're kind of like balled up. He says he's like a possum hanging upside down or something like that. And so Sanders carries him out by the hands and feet kind of bound together. So he talks to the media, and he's like, this kid's wild. And Sanders throws Moon in the back of the car and wants Moon to take him to go get Sanders' gun, because if you remember, Sanders had a gun that Moon pulled out of his holster as Sanders went sailing on down the river. And so Sanders wants that gun back. Sanders has been spreading lies saying that Moon shot at him, they ate his dogs, which we know he didn't eat the dogs because there's 3 of them and they're all over at Hal's house right now. So Moon's trying to figure out how does he get away from Sanders. He's got to go to a place that he recognizes, so he's actually directing Sanders to go to his old shelter, even though that's not really where that gun is. So chapter 39 is where we left off. Sanders turned off the highway at Mr. Wellington's road, drove into the forest, and stopped. He got out and went around the back of the car, and I heard him open and close the trunk. When he opened my door, he held out a dog collar on a chain. He grabbed my ear, and I gritted my teeth as he pulled me across the seat. Just like a dog, boy, he mumbled as he fastened the collar around my neck. Oh, that too tight? I didn't answer. He pulled the collar a notch tighter and pinched my skin right in the buckle. I'll hang you 3 feet off the ground with this thing. You try something funny. Sanders removed my ankle cuffs and jerked me to my feet. He draped a canteen of water around my neck and then shoved me forward. Get on, he said. We followed a trail of new orange flagging tape tied to trees about every 20 yards. I walked slowly in front, my mind imagining my escape and building traps and weapons. I went through all the tools at the shelter, and I tried to remember where I'd last seen each one of them. I listened to Sanders behind me and gauged his energy by the sound of his footsteps and his breathing. I like that thinking. He was tired after we climbed the first hill, but he got his energy back when we started through the flat pine forest. Once we came to Shomo Creek, he rested again against a tree for a few minutes, and then when he jerked my leash, I knew it was time for us to go on again. After we had traveled about a mile, Sanders yanked the leash so hard that I coughed against it. A sharp pain shot into my head, and I gritted my teeth again. Give me some water, I said. Usually the forest worked with me. The sounds of the animals and the light patterns and the breezes carrying smell told me what it knew. That day, though, it seemed like the forest had forgotten about me. It did nothing to help me. The animal sounds were distant and muffled. The sunlight lay in large, still blocks. There was no breeze. All that lay before me were endless hills of pine and swampy cane bottoms. As I realized this, my head grew dizzy and my thoughts wouldn't get straight. I couldn't remember what I had decided to do about Sanders. All I put together from my memory of the old shelter was a ruin of strewn logs and scattered cooking utensils. Suddenly, I felt like Sanders was going to kill me and leave me to rot. I thought of Kit. I thought of what Sanders would do to him after I was dead. I thought of dying and remembered what Pap said about not feeling pain when you died. I thought of Kit again. I thought of Hal. I hadn't said goodbye to either of them. My only friends. I rushed against the leash, and then I felt it jerk me backwards until I lay flat in the leaves. Sanders laughed over me. He said something I couldn't make out, and I was lifted up by the collar. Even though I coughed and gagged, it didn't hurt. He draped the canteen over me, and I began to walk. I trudged on through more hills and valleys, stopping for Sanders to rest every time the leash was jerked. Eventually, sunlight fell over me, and I was standing in the clearing with a ruined shelter before me. I had no plan. I couldn't even think of what to tell Sanders. I turned around slowly to face him. He was putting Copenhagen into his lip and breathing hard. He packed the tobacco with his tongue while his mouth hung open and gasped for air. And then he flicked the excess from his fingers and looked at me. Give me that water again. I pulled the canteen off my neck and I held it out to him. He snatched it, swirled off the top, and took a long drink. When he let it down, he said, I bet you'd like some of this, wouldn't you? I didn't answer. My throat was dry, but bigger problems worried me. He draped the canteen to the ground. He dropped the canteen to the ground, and he wiped his hand across his forehead. Well, let's see it. I don't have it. I said, you don't have what? I shook my head slowly. I don't have it. You don't have what? He yelled. I felt my body sag like it was waiting to fall to the ground with whatever Sanders was about to bring down on me. Suddenly I heard a voice. What's going on here? Mr. Wellington had come up the trail behind us. Sanders immediately loosened his grip on the chain and spun around to face the lawyer. You just mind your own business and you go back to your fancy lodge. What are you doing to this child? Police business. We'll be done shortly. Mr. Wellington looked at me and then back at Sanders. What kind of police business requires a dog leash? Sanders' face was turning red. Mister, I suggest you take your lawyer and back down that trail before I write you up for obstructing justice. Mr. Wellington stared at Sanders. Obstructing justice, you say? That's right. Mr. Wellington studied the ground and shook his head. He looked up slowly and his face became calm. Constable, you have any idea who you're talking to? Sanders' head began to twitch with anger. He dropped the leash and took a step toward the lawyer. You want to play that game, old man? You want to play who's who in Sumner County? Is that what you want? The chain was on the ground a few seconds before my senses came rushing back to me. I shut out the rest of their conversation and I focused on the limp chain lying in the leaves. With a quick yank, I had it flying through the air and gathered at my stomach. Clutching it about my chest with my hands still in handcuffs, I sprinted for the edge of the clearing. I heard yelling and footfalls behind me as I sprang into the forest. I ran until it seemed that everything around me was quiet. It might have been 200 yards. It might have been a mile. I didn't know where I was anymore. When I lay down and let the chain fall back into the leaves, I didn't feel tired. All I heard was my breathing and my heart beating. The treetops overhead were still and the sky was overcast. The forest was endless in all directions. It seemed to stretch out forever with no people. It seemed full of animals that turned their heads away from me and spoke about me in whispers. All I thought about was the fact that I was still alive and it no longer seemed to matter. Everybody I cared about was in trouble because of me. Chapter 40. Clouds slipped over my upturned eyes the rest of the afternoon. Just before sunset, the sky cleared and buzzards circled me. You might just want me this time, I replied. As the forest grayed, a coon waddled up to the leash chain and pawed it. When I stood, it scampered away in surprise. I took off the leash and I felt my neck where the ring of swollen skin was. Looking at my wrists, I saw where my handcuffs had worn me raw enough to bleed in places. I rolled over a nearby log and gathered some slugs. By rubbing their slime on my wrists, I made them slippery enough to pull off the handcuffs. Using the stars, I got my bearings and set out through the forest. In 45 minutes, I was staring at the windows of Mr. Wellington's lodge. I watched until I saw him get up from a chair and walk into the kitchen. He came back shortly with a drink and sat down. I stepped from the forest and I approached his door. He opened the door before I could knock and he stared down at me like he'd been expecting me a long time before. Well, what do you plan on doing now? He asked me. I'm ready for the law to come get me and take me back to jail. Well, last I saw the law, he was chasing you through the forest. I stared at Mr. Wellington blankly. Come on, he said, motioning for me to step inside. Mr. Wellington pointed for me to sit on the sofa, and he sat across from me in the chair. The clock ticked over his fireplace, and moths thumped against the window screens. Well, I'll take you in the morning, he said. I nodded, and I looked down at my knees. That constable's got problems. I've encountered men like him before. Now, you don't need him to be around, or you don't need to be around him. He won't let me alone. Mr. Wellington picked up the drink he'd left on the table and took a sip. He set it back down, and I felt him studying me. Did you do all those things that he said you did? I didn't do the part about eating the dogs and shooting at them. Why would he make things up like that? Why would he make up things like that? Well, I whipped up on him a couple of times. Maybe that's why. What's that mean? It means I licked him. Mr. Wellington scratched his chin. You licked him, huh? Well, he wouldn't let me alone. But you didn't shoot at him or eat his dogs? No, sir. Where are those dogs at? At my friend's house. He lives in a place called Union at a clay pit. Is this the other boy who escaped with you? Yes, sir. How about that gun? Which one? Well, whichever one he thinks you shot at him with. I left it in the forest. Out there where he had you today? No, that's where I told him it was. I lied. Mr. Wellington sat forward in his chair. He wanted you to go get it for him? I nodded. Now, why would he want it so bad? Because it's his, I guess. I wish he'd give me back the gun he took from me. Mr. Wellington sat back and chuckled to himself. First of all, kid, they can't put you in jail, at least not for long. You're too young. I don't know what Sanders has planned for you, but he's been getting the general public all riled up about you for some time now. I got a feeling I know what he's got planned for me. Well, I've been a lawyer long enough to know that his legal options are limited. However, this is not your typical situation. His father happens to be the judge. That could complicate things. This Sanders fellow, he's a bully and a bigot. He's got a chip on his shoulder. He's probably been there since he was a child. He's unintelligent, he's mean, and he's in a position of power. And that's a bad combination that you're facing. I didn't reply. Not to mention that you seem to have caused irreparable damage to his pride. What's that mean? Well, it means you're going to need some help. I don't need help from anybody. He can't do anything to me that I care about. He's going to go after Kit if he doesn't get his hands on me. Mr. Wellington sighed and stood up. He walked to the kitchen. I heard him turn on the faucet. When he returned, he held out a glass of water to me. I took it, and he sat back down in his chair. You know why I came after you today? No, sir. Well, I feel responsible for a lot of what's gone on with you. I'm not going to stand for that constable and his ways, especially on my property. I never thought it would turn out like this. How'd you know I was out there? Well, that chime sounded that lets me know somebody's coming up my road. When no one showed, I drove out and found Sanders' car. I figured he was up to no good when I saw your footprints with his. I was quiet for a minute. Finally, I said, you lied to me. Every grown person I know has lied to me, except Mr. Mitchell and Obregon and Mr. Carter. You're right. Even though it wasn't a technical lie, I lied to you all the same. I'm sorry about that. I was lonely. I'd have gone away if you'd wanted. I know. I know. First thing that came to my mind wasn't the right choice. I could have talked to you. Could have been your friend. Yes, sir. I got too much money. I thought I could buy my way above the general human condition. But when you get old and retire and live alone, you realize you're not any different. Sometimes you're worse off. I don't know about any of that. Mr. Wellington nodded to himself. Well, that's all right. You know, I've been following your story on television and in the newspapers. I've defended enough criminals to know a little bit about character. I had my doubts about all along that you were all they said you were. Now, I'll give them feisty and hard to hold, but you're not those other things Davy Sanders is putting on you. I already told you he lied. I'm going to help you, Moon. And it's not just for your sake, but it's for my own as well. You might as well just go along with me because I don't see that you got anything to lose. I don't care what you do, I said. Well, then why don't you go into the bathroom and clean up while I fix you a sandwich? Then you can get some sleep in the guest bedroom. We got a big day ahead of us tomorrow. We'll stop there for today.